want to welcome everyone who is hosting today and who is presenting today. And I want to first do some housekeeping, a few acknowledgments. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our funders. Jim DeNova, Vice President of the Benedum Foundation. Jim has really been our stalwart champion for RAC since we planted a seed almost 10 years ago. And it has grown into a wonderful RAC family and a wonderful RAC tree. So thank you, Jim. Ellen Rossi, who is not on screen today, who is president of the EQT Foundation and who is responsible for funding several wonderful residencies in West Virginia and Ohio. Ogilvy Institute is the fiscal sponsor for them. So thank you, Ellen, even though we can't see you today. I want to thank Mike Edwards and Dan Cox, who are our fiscal sponsors from Pennsylvania, who are behind the scenes as well today. And I'd like to thank, of course, Danielle McCracken, who's president of Ogilvy Institute, for introducing RAC into West Virginia. God, it seems like 100 years ago, but it was only 4 years ago. And continuing to offer RAC residencies. We have some special partners here today. Jim Wolf from the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History. I got it all out. And Jim, thank you for being here. And I want to thank WVDACH and a special shout out to Randall Reed. I can remember 4 years ago, you and Randall making a trek at 5 o'clock in the morning to come up and see one of our RAC presentations in California, PA. So Randall, if you are watching, shout out to the commissioner, but thank you, Jim, for being here. Also, James Moore, who is provost of West Virginia Wesleyan, and James is not only an academician, but he's a wonderful artist, a jazz artist, and I thank him from the bottom of my heart for introducing them to West Virginia Wesleyan and streaming it to the Black Student Union at West Virginia. So I hope a lot of people are going to be in the BSU house to watch this today. And my special thanks to Tammy Dixon, who is the producer of today's event. Tammy is the founder and managing artist of Bricolage Production Company. They do our Midnight Radio Junior component of RAC, and Tammy has really gotten us all together and fine-tuned all of those little details. And one more thing, I wanted to just acknowledge Attack Theater. They will be working with the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History. Michelle De La Reza, founder of Attack Theater. They will be doing some wonderful residencies in the upcoming year, 2021, with RAC, with Jim Wolf as one of our great partners. So thanks very much. And I'm going to kick this off just to tell you a little bit about RAC. RAC was created almost 10 years ago after many conversations with Jim and some other funders to really place teaching artists in rural schools to enhance the existing curriculum, or in many cases where the curriculum had been totally eliminated, unfortunately. Some of the schools that we're in offer art perhaps once a week, once a semester. It was really designed to be a co-curricular project-based model to really give kids a different type of arts education experience. And I think at this point in time, after almost 10 years, we've served 66 schools in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and a couple in Eastern Ohio, Rebecca Kiger, and I can't keep my screen, but she's here somewhere, and she's with one of her classes today in Bel Air, Ohio. Hi, Rebecca. We've served over 16,000 students, so we're very proud of that. I want to address something before I talk about how we got here today. And I want to talk about the optics of this panel. And many might think that the panel is not remarkably diverse, but that was purposeful on my part. Please know, these are the artists who have done the work, and I want it to be authentic about who has done this work. I could have asked many Black and brown colleagues and artists to be on this panel just because of their faces, but I did not. But since these artists you see before you have done this work for almost 10 years with Black, brown, and white children in rural schools, giving them a new perspective and giving them voice. In many cases, rural students don't have a lot of voice. These are the panelists here today. So I really did want to to say that. As a Black woman and as the creator of RAC, I wanted to be authentic, and I wanted these artists to do that work with me today. So, that being said, here's how we got here. I think we have all done a lot of reflection over the past 6 months, sitting at home, sitting in front of Zoom cameras, being stir crazy on lockdown. And we've done a lot of reflection that's caused us to bring ourselves to a certain point. And after, I think, one of the most turbulent times in our history that I can remember, and I'm a lot older than a lot of the people that you're seeing here, this has been one of the most difficult and turbulent times in terms of social unrest and systemic racism and social injustice. So I started to remember. I remembered being a very little girl, 5 or 6 years old. And I grew up Pittsburgh, DC, a little bit of Virginia because my grandpapa was from Virginia. And every year we'd make a pilgrimage. My favorite uncle, my favorite cousin, my father, myself, the 4 of us. Mama didn't go. She got car sick, didn't go. But we would make this pilgrimage. We'd start in Pittsburgh. And in those days, believe it or not, there was no turnpike. There was no Superhighway 70S. So you couldn't get to DC in 4 hours. We take Route 40, US Route 40, National Road. And it would take us about 8 hours. Mama would pack lunches before we left. And of course, we had eaten them an hour after we were in the car. So an hour and a half after we were in the car, we were screaming because we were hungry. And my father religiously, same place every year, and I was probably about 5 years old, I think, remembering this. But every year until I was probably 12, we would go on the same trip. Daddy would pull over on the side of the road. My uncle would get out of the car and disappear. And of course, my cousin and I, we want to go, we want to go. My father in his drawl would say, no, y'all just sit down and be quiet. About a half an hour later, he'd come back. And it seemed like forever for us. And he'd come back with brown paper bags full of sandwiches and Coca-Colas. And we were ecstatic. And we got to eat them and be quiet. And I think my daddy and my uncle were ecstatic too. And it wasn't until years later, sitting around at a family dinner, I was a young woman in college, that the significance of that particular incident came to light. My daddy was brown. You see my complexion. My cousin was a little bit darker. And in the heat of the summer, trust me, my cousin and I, our hair was frizzy. We could not pass for white, but my uncle could. He was tall, he was slender, he had blue eyes and straight hair. And that stuck with me for so many years. He was white enough to pass, and we were too brown to go into a store. I remember other things from the 50s. I remember, and I'm going to use it, colored and white water fountains, segregated lunch counters. I remember sitting at home in the 60s, watching a screen probably as big as my computer, watching Black and brown people being hosed and beaten by police, having police dogs attack them simply because they were trying to vote or they were peacefully protesting. I remember more of the 60s, 4 little Black girls being bombed and killed in a church. And I remember finally, 1964, LBJ signed the Voting Rights Act. And even then, it wasn't done. I remember Martin Luther King being assassinated in 1968. And I remember Bobby Kennedy being assassinated for being a civil rights activist, a white man who had taken up the banner of social justice. I remember EEOC and affirmative action in the 70s. And in the 80s, realized that it had benefited white women more than any other population. So I thought, oh my God, this is 2020. And look at what's happening here in our world. I think that after seeing and hearing so many atrocities, so many social injustices, the killing of Antoine Rose here in Pittsburgh, Sandra Bland, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, which was a tipping point for many people of color, I felt compelled as a Black woman to make a statement. Now, I know that the arts can always heal, and I know that the arts have voice, powerful voice. So I wanted my colleagues and my RAC family, our RAC family, to be able to continue to pledge to do the work to promote diversity and inclusion, to raise consciousness, and to give students voice through arts, to promote social justice along their path in life. Because remember, these kids are the next generation, and they are our future. That said, that's how we got here today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Danielle McCracken, who is president of the Ogilvy Institute and my friend and colleague, and like I said, first institution to introduce RAC into West Virginia. Danielle.
Thank you, Carm. Thank you for your authentic and truly moving words to open this session. I think it underscores the importance of us all coming together and to talk about the role of arts in education and creating a respectful and diverse environment for all. I'd like to welcome everyone here. Ogilvy Institute is certainly happy to be a co-host of this session today. We are very honored to have been the organization to bring RAC across the border of Pennsylvania into West Virginia. I know we have kind of a broad audience of people out there today. Everyone might not be familiar with Ogilvy Institute, but just a quick summary is Ogilvy Institute is a multidisciplinary nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1930, and we bring arts, culture, and nature programs to people all over the Ohio Valley. We're based in Wheeling. We offer many different programs at our various facilities, which include the Stifel Fine Arts Center, the School of Dance, the Towngate Theater, the Schrader Environmental and Education Center, and the museums of Ogilvy Institute. While we offer a lot of programming within those walls, we do a lot outside of those walls, and we really consider various community agencies and schools as important partners to our organization. And I remember 5 years ago, right after I started at Ogilvy Institute, sitting down with Jim DeNova and talking about our desire to reach farther beyond the city of Wheeling into so many of the communities that we serve, because so often there are barriers for getting to access our services. So it was through that first conversation that he connected me with Carm, and thank goodness we went to the Benedum Foundation, and their support allowed us to bring RAC into West Virginia. And I also have to thank Ellen Rossi of the EQT Foundation, who supported us. And also, I want to thank Randall Reed Smith and the Department of Arts, Culture, and History in West Virginia for allowing us to expand this program. So this program has allowed us to expand our teaching artist roster. Many of them you will hear speak today and really tell, I think, compelling stories about how their work through RAC has helped students learn about themselves, find their voice, develop a sense of community. And we hope that you'll enjoy learning about these experiences and perspectives from the various RAC artists today. We look forward to continuing this conversation. And we also hope that on May the 12th, many of you will be able to join us for the RAC Spring Institute, which is when we all come together as a group and we spotlight different RAC projects that have happened throughout the year. So my hope is that you'll be able to join us, and perhaps some of the projects that you see highlighted this year at the Institute will be a result of the inspiration that has come from this discussion today. So with that, I'd like to turn the program over to one of our moderators, Mr. Jim Wolf, who is the Education Coordinator for the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History. Jim is a wonderful person, a wonderful colleague and friend, and he works tirelessly to promote and support arts education throughout the state of West Virginia. And as Carm indicated earlier, he is going to be working to bring RAC into some of the southern parts of West Virginia who have not yet had the opportunity to experience this wonderful program. So Jim, I'll pass it over to you.
Danielle, thank you. Thanks so much for all of your work, and thanks for that generous introduction. I just want to say that, on behalf of the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, we're very, very pleased to be part of the RAC partnership and part of today's roundtable discussion. At the State Arts Office here in West Virginia, we're really eager to be a part of looking at how social justice and arts education intersect, and how they can intersect and overlap, and how the State Arts Office can help facilitate that. So today's discussion goes a long way towards getting that started. I also want to just acknowledge the tremendous ongoing partnerships in the state that Carm and Danielle have already alluded to. Rural Arts Collaborative's presence in West Virginia, beginning with Ogilvy Institute, has really enabled these really dynamic partnerships between arts organizations, schools, teaching artists, students, foundation support from Benedum and other funders, all coming together in these just incredible long-term residencies that allow students to learn in a way that is really just energizing and unique. And I think that the social justice focus we will find fits very well within the kind of projects that RAC has enabled us to have, that really empower student voices through arts education. So we look forward to continuing that work. Now, just a quick overview of the day, and then I have an introduction. We'll do a few more introductions, and then we'll get to our panel discussion. What we're going to do is we have an outstanding, very interesting, dynamic panel of 9 artists and teaching artists here today. These are folks from West Virginia and Pennsylvania who have all worked and are working with the Rural Arts Collaborative. In a few minutes, the panelists are going to respond to several questions, and we'll have an approximately 1-hour discussion around 6 topics, all under the umbrella of arts as a voice for social justice. After that, Danielle is going to return and is going to moderate a sort of an open question and answer period with the panelists. And so we encourage you to use the chat starting now to pose questions that you would like to hear the panelists discuss, and also to offer ideas as we go along today about how you might be inspired, or ideas that you have about how you can incorporate some of the issues that we talk about today into your own work and your own teaching and your own arts education projects. So in the Q&A session at the end, we can both pose additional questions, and we could also highlight some of these ideas or suggestions that you might want to offer as we go along today. So please, again, feel free to type that into the chat. Just go ahead and address it to everyone so that everyone can see. And we will be able to save the chat at the end of the session so that people can have access to it later as well. So if you have any resources, any links, anything you want to offer in the chat, please go ahead and do that. That's going to be kind of a simultaneous thing that'll help us to add to today's discussion and today's content. So that's kind of how things will work. And now it's my pleasure to make one additional introduction. I'm really, really pleased and honored to introduce Dr. Jim DeNova. Jim, as many of you know, is the Vice President of the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation. In that role, he leads the foundation's education agenda in West Virginia and southwestern Pennsylvania. And he has been he's so instrumental in a wide range of innovative educational initiatives throughout the region. you have, if you're here today, you've probably been affected or you've benefited or you've been part of in some way a project that Jim and the Benedum Foundation have made possible. You might not even know it, but I'm just saying you have, believe me. So with that, I want to welcome Jim, and I want to thank Jim on behalf of the Department of Arts, Culture, and History, and really arts education throughout the state for your fantastic work and your vision and leadership and support for all of us. Welcome, Jim DeNova.
Thank you. Thank you. So first, let me add my thanks to Carm for sharing those very personal reflections. That made this discussion far more human than I think would otherwise take place among folks who have had a lot of experiences, but I don't know that the experiences of today's participants and audience would really parallel those early years of your life in the South. So thank you for that. So a comment or two about RAC. When we started as a foundation to support this program, it was very specifically an academic venture that really looked at how the arts provide a very creative and robust medium for project-based learning. So we really were just starting fundamentally with academic aspirations. And while those aspirations have been met through the program, particularly around academic achievement in a number of areas, one of the unanticipated outcomes revolves around student voice. And as the students created works that had a theme and had a message, you started to see that the student voice and the expressions of real compassion around their communities, their families, social issues really came forth. And I thought that was wonderful. And it wasn't part of the plan. So it was a great sort of growth and emergence of this program. So today, through this conversation, I see the culmination of how these artists, you folks, have cultivated student voice around the issues that are most important. And I think that's powerful. And I can't wait to hear some of this conversation, and I certainly encourage audience participation in the second half of today. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim DeNova, and thanks, Carm. Thanks to all. We are about to go on into our panel now. We're going to let the panelists step up to the microphone, so to speak, and I'm going to ask each of them just to briefly introduce themselves and let us know a little bit about their work. And if you all don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and call on you and ask you to introduce yourselves. And Glennis Board, can we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. And what an honor to be part of this program. It's a true pleasure. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to be a participant on this panel as well. My name is Glennis Board. I work for West Virginia Public Broadcasting. I'm the assistant news manager there at West Virginia Public Broadcasting. And I stepped into a role as an instructor of storytelling. So student voice is like a deeply personal venture for me. And this was an awesome opportunity. I worked with Ohio County Schools of Wheeling Park. I worked with, and I had a unique scenario. I would say I worked with the alternative classroom, which are students who are deemed incapable of learning in a traditional environment. So we created an outdoor environment and worked to create stories from this place of outside by bringing people into, based on student interests. We created stories based on those, and then we partnered with West Virginia Public Broadcasting to get those stories out into the public. So that was my role here, and I'm eternally grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you, Glennis.
Thanks, Glynis. And next, our next panelist, Michelle De La Reza.
You're muted.
There you go. Hi, everybody. My name's Michelle De La Reza. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and sometimes y'all. We'll hear why. I want to first just say happy National Arts Education Week to everybody. A perfect platform to contribute to a national effort of arts education. I am the co-founder and co-artistic director of a company that's based in Pittsburgh called Attack Theater. Despite the name, we are a dance company. We have had the privilege of working with RAC and with Carmel for now many years, and teaching throughout Western Pennsylvania, and then, as Carm said, into West Virginia in this school year. When we're not working with RAC, we also have a very robust arts education creative learning program, working with thousands of students and teachers a year through our workshops, residencies, assemblies, professional learning opportunities for teachers, all with the lens of integrating kinesthetic learning and movement into the educational environment. So pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Michelle. And my apologies in advance if I don't get anybody's name quite exactly right. We're your vowel sounds, Michelle. I'm sorry. We're all we're sort of meeting each other virtually. Some of us for the first time here. So thank you. And next, Rebecca Kiger.
You're on mute.
Rebecca's on location.
I'm actually in a classroom today, which is really exciting because they can be part and listen in on this discussion as well. I am from West Virginia, but I've been able to do 2 residencies in Ohio, and I'm going into West Virginia in the coming year. Thanks to Carm and thanks to this vision and the collaborating partner with Stifel. I'm an independent photographer, and so I use photography as a tool for visual expression and voice. And thanks again for everyone who's here. Look forward to sharing.
Thank you, Rebecca. And our next panelist is Hiromi Katayama.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hiromi Katayama. I am originally from Japan, and I am a painter. I went to many schools through the LAC, thanks to Carm, in Pennsylvania as well as West Virginia. And I do a little bit of foundation education for the higher education as well in Ohio. And I'm very excited today to share all kinds of crazy experience I have. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Hiromi. Next panelist is Michael McCowan.
All right. Thank you, Jim Wolf. You are awesome, by the way. And I'm so excited to be here with all these people. I work with Ogilvy Institute, and I work with the Contemporary American Theater Festival. And this is my 4th year with the RAC program. And like I said, to be on this panel with these people is amazing. And I'm just hoping that I can make it through this next hour without crying. Like what Carm said and what Jim has said, it's extremely emotional, and I'm just extremely excited to be here. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Michael. And let's stay in the family and go to Peggy McCowan.
I wondered if you were going to do that. So my name is Peggy McCowan, and I offer you the pronouns of she, her, hers. I am the Associate Producing Director of the Contemporary American Theater Festival, and I always like to take a moment to acknowledge that our company stands on the lands of the Massawomack people, the First Nations tribe here. and that the Contemporary American Theater Festival is dedicated to producing and developing new American theater, and we're one of the top new play festivals, we think, in the country, and other people think that too. But also we are delighted to be a part of RAC as a sort of facilitator and resource, and that we are delighted to be able to help place artists and work through storytelling and all kinds of performance art to spread out through as many schools in West Virginia as we can. So we're really delighted to be a part of this programming and to have this opportunity. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And let us now hear from James Moore, please.
Hi, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm James Moore. I joined the faculty at West Virginia Wesleyan College in 2006 as a member of the music faculty. I'm a jazz musician by trade and by passion. My experience with RAC is new. Last year was my first year, and I'm very grateful to Carm for reaching out, and also for Jim DeNova for introducing the two of us while I was on a gig, which was really awesome. And I got to work with students at Madonna High School in Weirton, West Virginia, two groups of students actually. Perhaps most meaningful for me, working with the 10th grade history class, doing a variety of interactive lectures and activities and demonstrations on not only the nuts and bolts of Black American music, but the sociocultural and sociopolitical history of that critically important genre. And I'm just, as a native West Virginian, I'm so proud of the work that happens in this organization. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll follow Michelle and say also cool with y'all, and also cool with yins. So thank you for having me here.
All inclusive. Thank you, James. Appreciate it. And next, we'll hear from Michelle Sable.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here today. Just a little history. I started off going to film school, and I worked in the film and TV industry for about 10 years before I started my own studio art business in 1998. So I've been a self-sustaining independent studio artist since then. I began working as a teaching artist about 7 years ago. I started working with actually the Benedum Foundation through Wash Arts in Washington, PA. And I work through city parks for the city of Pittsburgh. I work through Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. I've done some grants through them. And also the Center for the Arts in Pittsburgh as well. And done some really interesting Office of Public Artworks in Pittsburgh with some people in Hazelwood and around the different neighborhoods. So I've been working with RAC for about, I guess, 3 years now. And I recently went back to school and I got a BA in sociology with a concentration in deviance. And I am now in a graduate program to become a psychotherapist for clinical mental health with a concentration in expressive arts therapy. Because I just feel a lot of what I do in the schools actually has to do with tending to children's mental health and through their expression. So I work with that quite a lot in the classroom.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And wrapping up the panel, we're going to go to Sam. Sam, I'm going to let you say your last name because I can't remember if it's a k or a ch.
It's complicated. It's Zurich. It's like Zurich. It's Turek. Zurich with a T. Hi, everyone. I'm also incredibly excited to be here. I am the head of education for a company called Bricolage Production Company. We have a theater in downtown Pittsburgh. We specialize in immersive theater there, and also for almost 20 years now, we've been running a radio style drama there at the theater, what we call midnight radio. Sort of think of Prairie Home Companion, live actors performing in front of microphones as if they were on the radio. In about 2003, through the generous funding of the Benedum Foundation, we were able to turn the midnight radio program into an in-school residency program that we call Midnight Radio Junior. We spend 10 sessions, usually over 10 weeks, in school working with an entire grade level. We bring in professional teaching artists, playwrights, actors, directors to work with the students so that they can research, write, rehearse, and perform their own Midnight Radio Junior show. It's a great big heavy lift. The kids get a lot out of the project-based learning that happens there and the arts integration as well. We've been working with Rack and Carm from the very beginning. She calls me her partner in crime, and it's one of my favorite titles that I've ever had. We've had 21 residencies in 15 different schools in Southwestern PA and West Virginia so far, and we've got a lot more on the calendar, although the calendar keeps getting pushed back a little bit and a little bit more over this last 6 months. I'm very excited to see what this conversation turns out like. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, Sam. What an amazing panel. Carm, where do you find these people? It's incredible. Great job, and thank you again for bringing everyone together today. I also just want to say a word of thanks to everyone who has joined us. You know, we would gladly have this conversation among ourselves and learn from each other, and that would be a very valuable thing. But truly, we're here to expand the conversation, and so we really appreciate everyone joining in today. And just a quick reminder, please feel free as we get into the questions now to join in the chat, either with questions that you'd like to pose to the panelists, or with your own observations about how you can incorporate some of these social justice concepts into your work in arts and arts education. So with that, let us go on to the questions for the panelists. I'm going to start. Carm and I are going to ask the questions, and we're going to direct them to individual panelists. So we're going to begin with a question directed to Michelle. And Michelle, and Hiromi is going to also answer this question as well. Michelle, can you talk about, do you feel that your own personal, professional, educational experience has prepared you to identify and understand systemic racism? And how do you then incorporate that understanding into your current work as a teaching artist?
Well, I hope you don't kick me off this panel with this first answer. Do I feel like my education experience prepared me to identify and understand systemic racism? No. I think it's important to admit that. It's important to have the humility, transparency, reflection in this panel and in this moment on the inequitable racial constructs that are so deeply embedded in our education system, and very personally in my arts training. A little bit about that. I'm the product of a K-12 public school education in one of the largest districts in the country, actually in Houston, Texas. For those who haven't been to Houston, it's a city with a great ethnic diversity, predominantly Latino, today about 44%, about 25% white, 23% Black, and 6% Asian. That's just to give a snapshot of where I grew up as I'm a Latina woman. My father and his family had to leave Bolivia when he was around 10 years old and landed in Queens, New York. I went to integrated schools in the 70s, and Carm already kind of referred to the affirmative action, forced busing, and explosion of magnet schools, which my memory is often creating like a bubble with school within a school, and one that I'm here to say that I benefited from, and one that I see how many were left behind. I can say, to answer the question about education, that I probably contribute the primary bulk of my formative part of my education as an artist at the Juilliard School in New York City, where I attended and graduated. It was a conservatory. It was amazing. We danced a lot. We immersed ourselves in the learning of Eurocentric techniques, some dance history and notation, but mostly I come to reflect on, focused on a construct of whiteness, of hierarchy, competition, of assimilation, and an aspiration. Our goal was to attain what we believed was the aesthetic of, for my training, ballet and American modern dance. So no, it did not exactly prepare me to understand, to identify systemic racism. It did make me a great dancer. It did steep me in a European arrogance that I am now only truly unpacking. I really thought if you worked hard enough, your whole career, if you cared deeply enough, if you dreamed big enough, that's what you needed. That worked fairly well for me, but not for everyone. It didn't acknowledge was access. What were the oppressive structures that denied access to some while providing access for others? I went to this amazing elite school, but I had earlier training. How did access relate to the training of folks that didn't have those experiences before they were auditioning for a school like Juilliard? I investigated, or I'm thinking about the kind of the ones that got to Juilliard were the bodies that were the closest to a white standard for which the whole technique is kind of designed and measured. So at Juilliard, again, amazing school. And I will say that a tremendous amount of things have changed since I've been there, and I'm happy to share that later at another time. But there I got incredible technique, tools, and strategies to reproduce, to replicate, to perpetuate that technique, ideas, and structures. And what I recognize is what I didn't get tools for was to question, to interrogate, to respond to societal issues, so I could recognize the systemic racism within that environment. So fast forward, professional dancer, teaching artist, what did I do? Well, as a teaching artist, thank you, RAC, I did the exact opposite of what Juilliard taught me. With my partners and collaborators, I developed Attack Theater's educational philosophy under this notion that movement, we started saying movement even with dance, movement and dance is an essential part of living and learning. I work with my students, the students that I work with intentionally doesn't rely on, when we go into the schools, on prior knowledge, but instead it recognizes and honors the movement as a nonverbal tool of expression for embodied learning, a different way of communicating, collaborating, analyzing, creating and constructing meaning, and telling our stories primarily in my art form, non-verbally. Made me think the second part of the question was, how do you incorporate all of that? Well, I was thinking about a residency that we did. It was Weilandville Elementary. It's a very, very small rural school in Western Pennsylvania. And I was thinking about what we were working on, and inspired by an experience that I actually had working in Hawaii with a halau many years ago on an artistic collaboration. And in one of our first rehearsals, the Hawaiian artist said to us, "Who you?" And we had a really amazing conversation and kind of sparking of a movement experience from there. So with these third graders in a rural school in Western PA, I changed it a little bit, and I said, and the students responded and said to the prompt, "I am." I heard, "I am athletic. I am a dog lover. I am an only child. I am Italian. I am sneaky. I am sad." The students from there, we created an identity kind of movement map, a self-archive, where the students generated movements to express those ideas. And then we collaborated to create a unique sense of community. I can tell you there really wasn't any Tombe Padbere Glissade Grand Jetés. But what there was beauty and magic and a movement bank that showed their personal strengths, their love, enduring truth, symbolic action, and a movement map, an identity map that honored and celebrated the individual and also collected as that small community of third graders. So yes, I do think that my teaching philosophy is different in schools than how I was trained. But I also think that this moment to be here on this panel and the last many months has really been a huge personal time of reckoning and reflection and questioning, looking inside the classroom when myself or my incredible colleagues at Attack Theater are the guides of learning, but also looking at what we're doing and also what we're not doing. And how can we to continue through RAC and through our other residencies to investigate and facilitate student voices and art making. And I'm just grateful to be a part of that, that conversation that's happening inside my head and with many others. So how's that?
Michelle, thank you so much for a really, really thoughtful response. We appreciate it. And we want to look at the same question now with another panelist and someone from a different arts discipline and perhaps a different perspective. So Hiromi, I'd like to direct it to you. Again, how do you feel that your own experience has prepared you to identify and understand systemic racism? And how do you incorporate that understanding into your work as a teaching artist?
Okay, so my answer will be yes first, because when I was in high school, I was still in Japan, I realized, oh, what I want to do. And I always knew I want to be an artist, but I had to think about, in Japan, we have a strict entrance exam policy to get into the art school. So I had to think about what I really wanted to study in art. And I have a choice of learning Western art, which is oil painting, or the Japanese traditional art. I decided that I would like to share the Japanese art culture. So I chose the Japanese art course. And to be able to pass entrance exams, I did an art training for about 6 to 10 p.m. almost every night after school, and 4 to 6 p.m. after school at school. So I did about 6 to 8 hours of the art training every single day to prepare to get into the school. And after that, 4 years of Japanese art, traditional art education. It's a very mentor system. So we follow the professor, listen to them, and do whatever they think that I should do, we should do. I start wondering, do I want to go to a master education in Japanese art, or do I want to go somewhere else to learn a little more, explore about who I am? And I decided, well, I wanted to share my Japanese art culture, so let's go to the United States. So I decided I wanted to learn more about who I am, how to express myself, and how to, well, of course, speak some English as well. So I jumped out of the country, decided to take my Master of Fine Arts in Edinburgh University. It took me about 1 year of the preparations, getting out of the vaccinations and to get into dorm and start over. Obviously, I study a little bit of English, which was not really helpful because I was apparently not a really good book learner. So I went in there. I finally got to the United States. My first art classroom, I was so excited. And I was, I have a very, very high expectation of like what I'm gonna learn or what we can share or people will be interested. Not really, anybody was not interested in any of it. First conversation I had with my professor at the critique, he asked me, what do you want to do here, me? And I said to him, I would like to continue using my Japanese traditional painting method to create my artwork and discover deeper in who I am. He said to me back, why don't you go to West Coast? I can teach you any of your Japanese stuff. And it made me really sad because this entire year I prepared to get there, finally got there. And then first things he said was like, he's not welcoming whatever I wanted to do there. So I decided, I was so mad, sad, mad. And then I thought about transferring to the West Coast. But then I realized I promised to my grandmother, who supported me my higher education from Japan, that she told me, if you're gonna go to Japan, you must graduate. That's what she told me before I go. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna fight with this man. So I fought through the semester with him without speaking any good English. I just say no, no, no for everything he said. And I finished my crazy semester with him. After that, using a Japanese paint, even he said better not to. And I kept doing the material wise, I'm kept using the Japanese pigment, even I know they refuse to teach me through that material because they have no knowledge of it. But I believe that the material is just material. The painting is the one should communicate and express who I am. So I just kept using it. And then about 2 years passed, they start probably giving and like, all right, Hirami, they start responding to me that, okay, what are you using? Finally, they ask me like, what's the difference between what I'm using as far as the material goes and what oil painting they've been teaching for the other students. And through that experience, I realized that relationship is the key to the education. And if I take my time and trying to get to know them, and if they get to know me, then we'll make some kind of relationship. And relationship will continue to have a successful education. So through that experience, I always wanted to bring it to the LAC classroom situation. So in the LAC is a perfect example of like basically the platform for me to make my dream come true, because I always wanted to share my Japanese culture. I get going to the schools and kids, I share my culture and they share their culture to me, and we exchange the who are we together, and that's how I start building relationships. Since we're completely different culture background and different culture differences, it's very interesting to get to know each other. And then we using Japanese culture material, the art materials, and then they are going to use their environment with who they are into the art. So we get to collaborate together to make art. And through those experiences, we have some hard time to, like, there's one school that I went to that the teacher told me, you came into the classroom and did not seem like you have any plans. Yes, I did not have plans because it was not structured. This LAC was not meant to be structured. I wanted to get to know them first, and I wanted to get to them to know me first. And we would like, I would like to take time, since LAC is a whole year program or 4-month program, we have time to build strong relationship first. And I value those time to build the relationship through the art, so the big cultural difference could overcome and collaborate through art. So that's my strong philosophy. The answer?
That's wonderful.
Question?
Yes.
Okay.
Hiromi, thank you so much. Thanks for that personal perspective. Really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Carm for another question.
Thanks, Jim. And thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Hiromi. I can certainly speak to what Hiromi just said, because we did have some difficulties when she started with RAC, and I can certainly understand that she was prepared for those difficulties, and we worked them out. And Michelle, thank you for that enlightening and amazing presentation. We all know that art can express change. It can tell a cultural story through symbolism. And we meaning you all who are artists, express ourselves differently through the arts. What types of artwork do you feel speak to social justice? And I think I'm going to hand this one to Michael McCowan.
All right. So the whole history of art is reaction. So every movement in art is reacting to something that's happening in culture. And it's what's great about it is that it's worldwide. So you have movements like the Impressionists, you have movements like the Abstract Expressionists, you have the land art movement, and this is all reacting to what's happening at that time. And I feel like, Carm, this is awesome that you're doing this right now, because this is our window of opportunity. You know, like this is our time. Like right now we can do something to help to create change. And it's not, I mean, it probably won't affect the people in positions right now, but what we're looking forward to is the next generation. You know, like if we can get the voice out there so that kids can hear these things and can be aware of these things, that's great. So going back to the specifics of the question, sorry if I wandered off a little bit right there. Like Judy Chicago completely lifted the feminist movement through her art. Like she gave it a voice and she gave it a presence. And if you want to look at like the immediacy of things right now, look at what Dave Chappelle did, his 846. Like as soon as George Floyd was murdered, he did that special. And it was just him using his platform to communicate. And that's all it is. You know, it's like when I went through my yoga teacher certification, my teacher, like we had to find 7 different ways of communicating something. So that's why it's important that we have all these different teachers, because we need all those different voices, because people hear things in different ways. And we just have to keep putting it out there, which again, like I thank you for doing this. So I don't know, I think that's it.
Michael, thank you for many things, for being the first artist in West Virginia to do an amazing RAC residency in Wetzel County at Magnolia High School. And Michael's vision really helped set the stage with Danielle and I, and Danielle, I'm sure you would agree with that, for some of the things that would happen with those residencies through your installation, through your vision of what we should be doing right now. So thanks. I'm going to throw that question to James Moore. James, we know art can express change and tell a cultural story through symbolism. So you as a musician, obviously you have your own story, but what types of artwork speak to social justice, and how can music speak to social justice?
This is a great question, Carmen. I appreciate it. I think of this on sort of 2 planes, and I come at it from the perspective of a jazz musician and a student of Black music. If we look at some of, there's an overt plane, and then there's the sort of baked into the cake plane. Those terms are not lining up well, but that's how I think of it. Overtly speaking, we need look no further than the titles of compositions or of albums that have been handed to us by great composers in jazz music. Art Blakey's seminal recording that he titled Freedom Rider, released in the 1960s. Joe Henderson's Our Thing, Joe Henderson's In Pursuit of Blackness, Max Roach and Abby Lincoln's great album We Insist Freedom Now, John Coltrane's composition Alabama. These compositions in title and in spirit reflect a call for social justice, a call for a recognition of respect and equality. And it's, again, I think of those as being quite overt. Then there's the nuts and bolts part of jazz music. In practice, it's a music that I believe reflects social justice in that within the way that we perform, it requires us to be inclusive on the bandstand. It requires us to show respect to fellow performers. It requires empathetic listening, and it requires a democratic exchange that's conversational. And in many ways, it represents, it itself represents a space where a recognition of the importance of social justice is essential for great music in the Black music tradition to exist. So that's how I conceive of it.
James, that's a really excellent framework. Being a jazz aficionado, as you know I am, so many of my friends that I've known since I was 12 years old are jazz musicians. And in that context, you play in a lot of white audiences. So what you said is really that perfect scenario. It can be a perfect storm when it's approached in a perfect way. So thank you. Jim, I'm gonna toss Jim Wolf. There's a lot of Jims here today. Jim Wolf, I'm gonna toss the next question for you to ask.
Thanks, Carm.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be for Glynis and Peggy, and Glynis, we'll start with you, if that's okay. The next question is, can you talk about the barriers that you see in our effort to transform the education system to confront systemic injustice?
Sorry, did you say you were going to start with me?
Yes, yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, okay. I've got a little one and I hope it isn't too disruptive. Super mom here, some childcare. She's dropped out the last second. So please just bear with me and I might have to pass it to you, Peg, really quick. But this is an important question and a good one, and I appreciate the opportunity. So I think that when we talk about barriers to evolving the education system, because I do believe that it is a system that can heal itself because it is one of learning. But I think that the biggest barrier is the willingness of white people to learn about the extent of existing systemic injustice. I really see that that is the biggest barrier. And especially in places like West Virginia, that's more than 90% white. We have to be very honest. So I think it's really easy in a place like this to sit in a comfortable box believing that racism doesn't exist because we don't see it. And or buying into these false narratives that we've had some kind of charmed, enlightened history divorced from slavery and oppression, which is so far from the truth. So yeah, I think, and I think also we're talking about a very spread out population, and I think a lot of times isolation can breed a lot of ignorance. And so that is another really big barrier that needs to be and can be sort of spearheaded and dealt with, I think, through the arts a lot of times. So, and okay, and I want to just mention that, like, as a member of the news media, I've really had the privilege of being tasked with observing recent phenomena, you know, watching the education system go through this stress test that's COVID-19 and the interesting pressures that I think are most likely linked to that pandemic, which is the social unrest, and especially among white populations in reaction to continued inequity throughout society that we're seeing. So, so just to highlight again those barriers, you know, we have to think about poverty as well, and remember things that, like, a student who can't read, I mean, we know this to be true with research, a student who can't read on grade level by third grade is 4 times less likely to graduate than a child who does read proficiently by that time. And if you add poverty to that mix, it's 13 times less likely to graduate on time. And then in West Virginia, you really only have to look at incarceration rates to see the stark symptoms of systemic racism. Okay, so it's very clear. So we're locking up so many of our own people, and of course, it's widely disproportionate amount of these folks are Black and brown. And of course, you know, I had the pleasure of working through my RAC residency with kids who as I said, were deemed incapable of learning in traditional learning environments. And this population too really revealed a widely disproportionate amount of children of color, given the demographic breakdown of the region. So again, that's just very apparent. So we're up against a lot, and I think the pandemic is really revealing how woefully unjust our world is for these kids. And in a way, I'm kind of grateful to the pandemic for that clarity and for those revelations, because I really think that education, people within education especially, can, and I think in some places are becoming motivated to act. And so the last point that I want to point out is that while I can't speak for all school systems, where I've been engaged through RAC with Wheeling Park High School and Ohio County Schools, there have been some really fascinating initiatives that I think are hoping to address some of these built-in barriers to evolve into a healthier society. And I really think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take number one, strong leadership that knows how to reach out to the people who need to be reached out to. And there are some of these plans that we're seeing at Wheeling Park. There's, with leadership from Rick Jones and Dr. Miller and folks at Wheeling Park High School and other amazing people like Ogilvy Institute and other places, we are seeing things like there's people are interested in changing how kids of colors are introduced to career centers. We're seeing cultural response teams, which are committees of students, and we're seeing positive drop-in teams. These are some of the ideas that are being cultivated. Now, how they will be employed and will they be effective, and what is the commitment to that is what's at stake right now and what we're going to be seeing. But I also think that the arts is a critical missile to be launched to help continue to evolve and evoke that change in kids today, as Michael said, so that we can hope for a better outcomes tomorrow.
Thanks, Glynis. I just want to pepper this before we go to you, Peg. I'm glad you pointed out the demographics of West Virginia, and I think having written so many grants for funding for RAC, I think people of color make up what, 3%? 3%.
Yeah, it's almost 4%, but yes, 3%.
And it's increased since RAC started, because it was 3%
10
years ago. So thank you for that. I'm sorry, Peg.
Thanks, Carm. Thanks, Glynis. You actually said a lot of things that are similar to the way in which I was going to respond. So maybe I'll encapsulate it in a slightly different way. And that is to say that I think the greatest barrier is really, at this point in our society, our inability to come to a unified understanding, right? So you can't address an educational program about social justice until you accept and acknowledge that there is social injustice. And I think that as any great transformative journey happens, it is about examining on a personal level and a societal level who we were, who we are now, with real authentic, hard, truth-seeking questioning, acknowledging that, and then dreaming of who we want to be, right? And so I think we are in right now this very challenging time of trying to truly understand who we are as a society. And it is through the arts, it is through the work of these people that you're hearing from today that lead these kinds of conversations, lead these opportunities for transformation, for exploration, to help bring us to some unified understanding. And I really think it is the point at which we get there and we can look at one another and we can agree on things like, what language are we talking about? Is this equity, diversity, and inclusion, or is this really anti-racism and
Peggy's frozen. Do we want to go on to the next question, Jim?
Carmel, oh, she's back.
Okay.
That we're in the greatest opportunity of our lifetimes to do that, and that we will get there. And then when that happens, I think social justice will really begin to soar in the educational system.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Peggy, and thanks for coming back to finish. Don't give up. Okay, Carm, next question is over to you.
Sure. Rebecca Kiger, this one is for you because actually I've seen you do this. And then we're going to ask the same question of Michelle Sable. So Michelle, be prepared. How do you help students shape their own message around social justice and racial injustice through your artistry? You know, you've got a tandem thing to balance there. And Rebecca, I've seen you do that through the zine, which you created with your students. So talk a little bit about how you create your own message. And you're creating one right now because you're in Bel Air, Ohio with your students. Unmute.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi. I'm really enjoying hearing all of you. I'm learning a lot. I think it's so great to hear this conversation from so many different people because it helps us practice talking about these things and learn language. So let me get to Carm's question. And I have a little cheat sheet here to help me think through some of my ideas. So I'm coming at this project as a documentary photographer rather than a fine art photographer. So with that information, I need to give you a little background that you may be aware of, but Appalachia has been a region that has been mined for its resources and its content, often by people from outside of the region. That is also part of the photographic history of this region. And because of that history and how it's impacted my own life and my peers and the people in this community, I've wanted justice around that issue. So what that means, bringing that to the classroom, is providing students with visual storytelling tools so they can tell their own story. In Appalachia, we undoubtedly have storytellers, but sometimes our resources are slim. So you begin with what you have. And I think that is empowering. I call that Appalachian ingenuity. It is a skill of making do with what you have. So when I entered this program for the first time 2 years ago, we simply started with cell phones, which most people have. And when they didn't, that was something we could provide. We also had very basic old cameras, old point and shoots. So with those tools, we focused on, I reiterated to the students over and over again that their voice matters, because in Appalachia, we have been told quite the contrary. And we need to realize that everyone here is important and what they have to say is important. So to counter that message, I tell them that their voice matters. But we're talking about photography. So photography isn't writing, it's not speaking, it's a visual language. So part of what I do is help them understand that language by looking at as much photographic work from a diverse group of people throughout the history, because only in understanding that foundation, that foundation is important. But I'm very conscious, and especially now, I have been purchasing book after book of women and people of color, because those are voices that have been lacking for too long in photography. So while the students that I worked with 2 years ago what we did is we made a magazine or a zine of their work. While it focused on their personal lives and their community, it was important to me to extend and connect them to a larger community. Glynis talked about what isolation does, what segregation has done, but also, you know, we're in West Virginia. That's played a part of our history here. It sometimes continues ideas because you're not connecting with people outside of where you live. So that is one thing I felt very passionate about because I have had the privilege. I've had the privilege to travel. I've had the privilege to meet people. And it's through meeting people in photography that you get somewhere. That is an honest telling of what this world in photography is. So I have, how do I give, right? How do we as artists pass on the gifts, pass on the resources? And the way we did that is we would Skype with a Pulitzer Prize winning editor who's now in Michigan, but used to be editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. Or I would ask artists from Pittsburgh or Columbus to come in and share their work. Because one of the experiences for many people in the world is, again, not the ability to go beyond their community. So there's no judgment about that, but I would say, especially for students who are drawn to the arts, these sensitive souls who are interested in the arts, having a lifeline outside the community is sometimes helping them survive. So the zine we made, boy, were we lucky. It got the kids invited to New York City. Their work was published in the Washington Post. It was collected all over the world. And we were able to give each student from those sales $250. Money is empowerment. And finally, the artistic process. The artistic process is one that includes a lot of frustration and a lot of failure. But when we as a group go through that process, there is a reward. And that reward, it's in photography. So maybe they apply that to photography, but I believe that going through that process provides them with a skill for future endeavors. How can they go to their next project, whatever it might be, get through their frustrations, get through their failures, and experience the reward of completion. So that joy and that success, to me, that is part of social justice.
Thanks, Rebecca. I have seen you work with your students because I had the pleasure of attending your class when you were putting the zine together. And also, Rebecca went above and beyond with her second residency, which was interrupted by the pandemic, and made certain that those students' voice and photos were heard on the side of a building in Bridgeport, am I right? Bridgeport, Ohio. So if you're in Bridgeport, Ohio, and you see those faces, and there are black and brown and white faces in all of those that are on that building, that's Rebecca Kiger. Thanks, Rebecca. Michelle Sable, I'm going to turn to you and ask you that very same question. How do you help students shape their message around social justice and racial injustice through your own artistry?
So I did a few notes here, and I'm going to go off of those because I think I wanted to build on how I really speak with the students. So hopefully this will give a flow to how I really approach things in the classroom. So I talk a lot about power and privilege and prestige and how social status relates to the currency of art. So what does it mean for an artist to have their work validated by prestigious institutions? Who has the power to purchase art? And what does it represent when an artist is collected? Who is privileged enough to have their work command high prices? What systems got them there? What's the difference between public art and art in an institution like a museum and art that's in a private collection? Who gets to have a voice and who doesn't, and why might that be? So I want to open their eyes to a facet of the world that they haven't previously considered, though they're surrounded by it. I asked them to think about creativity and the role it plays in their lives. They don't initially think that it plays really much of a role at all. I asked them to contemplate the architecture that surrounds them, the clothes they're wearing, industrial design, visual language, famous artists through history, film, TV, popular culture. I endeavor to really put art in a context. It's a very important word to me, context, to their lives through exposing them to books, videos, taking them on field trips specifically. So I want them to peek out over the top edge of the boundary wall of their institution, which is their school. And I want them to see themselves as part of a larger world and physically put them in that context. So I ask them most importantly to have a point of view. So it's common, but it took me, as it does all artists, many years to develop my own voice as an artist. It's very important. I did this by continually interrogating my point of view, giving opportunity to expression, and thinking, being, and doing with great intention. So we need to ask kids more often what they feel and what they think about things, and invite them to vigorously question the systems in which they live, the systems which are governing their potential. So it's not my intention to lead anyone to express anything in particular. So, but rather that they find that it's really important for them to be able to articulate why they think something is important. I want them to find their voice as creators, and creators are doers, and doers are empowered. Empowered people see systems as malleable. Empowered people can say, I know why my education affects my social status and my potential. I demand more opportunities. I demand that my curriculum reflects the achievements of people who look like me. Maybe my biopsychosocial needs aren't being met. I demand less policing and exponentially better medical, social, and mental health services for everybody. Financial systems that seem to be rigged to penalize the poor. You know, I demand free public programs and laws that intentionally grow wealth for the historically disenfranchised. So it's a point of trying to investigate how they think and give them an opportunity to express. When I talk to kids about power, privilege, and prestige, I ask them if anyone in their lives up to this point has ever talked to them about these things before, or asked them to even think about them. I have never heard one kid say yes to that question. By bringing systems to students' awareness, students become, as Paulo Freire would put it, co-creators of knowledge instead of just receptacles. I believe it takes both the observer and the observed to create awareness, and that awareness is where the paradigm shifts, both personally and societally.
Michelle, very, Carm, well stated, and you said something that rings, well, so true, because when RAC was created, and you know it from reading so many overviews of RAC, it was meant to give students a new way of thinking, seeing, being, and doing. I've seen you in the classroom. I've seen what you've done. I hear the questions that the students have asked you and how you empower them, taking them to places like the Glass Factory and the Heinz History Museum to see the history of the art that they are creating. So well said and well done. Thanks so much. Jim Wolf, I'm going to turn it over to you again.
Thanks, Carm. Just a reminder and a quick reset. We're coming up on 2:30. We have 2 more questions that we want to get to. This is a fantastic conversation, so we don't want to really have to cut it short. A reminder to all the participants, if you do have questions that you'd like to see us address, go ahead and type those into the chat so that we know that something's coming. If not, that's fine too. We'll just go ahead and continue this conversation. We've got plenty to talk about. But I just wanted to give you a reminder to go ahead and enter things in the chat if you have anything. We're going to continue now with the next question, which is going to start with Sam. Sam, how do you go about giving your students a better understanding that they can have a voice in social responsibility and racial equity through art?
Thanks, Jim. I just want to say that I'm so impressed with the level of the discussion that's happening here. I'm taking lots of notes, and I'd love to be able to talk about everything that everyone said so far. In answering this question and thinking about the program that we've been running for the last 7 years, just to remind everyone, we help students research and write and rehearse and perform radio plays, radio dramas. We connect these to the curricula that they're studying in their classrooms, and there are some times when the curriculum matches up very effectively with a kind of social justice sort of message. When we're studying the Civil War, for instance, it's very easy to make a curricular connection between the history of what caused the Civil War, what the Civil War was about, what the results of the Civil War was. But more than anything, and what I think all of the arts are capable of doing, is teaching both empathy and resilience. In our art form, in the performing arts, when we're asking students to write from the perspective of a person who perhaps was enslaved, it puts them in the position of having to make that empathic connection to that person to be able to write from their perspective so that they can perform that character's actions. And there's another kind of empathy that comes through performance as well, which is the empathy that you feel when you're sharing the stage with a lot of your classmates and all of you are working together to build a production together. You have to be a great listener to be able to do that. You have to be able to feel what the other people on stage are feeling at that time. And those are skills that translate to having the ability to, as Glynis said, learn more about the systems that govern your world. When you start seeing things from other people's perspectives, you can't help but become more knowledgeable about what other people are going through. The idea of resilience is something that Rebecca mentioned when it comes to bringing a project to fruition, as we do. Being an artist and finishing a project is hard. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of focus, and you want to quit. You want to quit several times before the thing is over, and forcing yourself to be resilient and to keep working and to listen to the teaching artists who are yelling at you and telling you you've got to keep going and do better teaches you a lesson when you get to the end of a project that it's not easy to learn in any other form than in arts and education. Finishing that project, knowing that you had to go through the fire of creating the project and that you come out the other side and you have something that you're proud of that represents some perspective that you have on the world, is an incredibly powerful lesson to learn when the social justice that I think we're talking about, that we're trying to achieve, is not going to come easy. It hasn't come easy for years, and every time we've made progress, the progress kind of seems to stall out, and then we go into another period where things start to backslide. And my colleague at Bricolage in the chat before we started talking turned me on to something called the Kerner Commission, which was something LBJ had happened in 1968, which said, oh, by the way, white racism is the reason that all of our cities are on fire right now.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that such a thing existed. It was right there on paper. It was published. There's a picture of the paperback on Wikipedia. And when Richard Nixon took office in the January of 1969, that was swept under the rug. And it apparently, as a country, we forgot about it for 50 years. So we have the ability to teach resilience so that when this battle is re-engaged, we will understand that it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen next week. We're going to have to fight and keep fighting until the fight is won.
Amen, Sam. Amen to that.
Thank you, Sam. James Moore, same question directed towards you in terms of helping students understand how they can have a voice in social responsibility and racial equity through art.
So I come at this from a historical perspective, and also as somebody who is fortunate enough to be part of a lineage in this music. I work very hard to make sure that my students understand where this music came from, where it is now, and that they have a part to play in where it's headed, regardless of their backgrounds or their demographics or their ethnicity. But that has to be rooted, again, in an understanding of the traditions of this music. My mentor and dissertation advisor at the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Nathan Davis, a titan and powerhouse in jazz education and jazz performance around the globe, always told us, those of us in the program, two things. When you get out there in the world and you're teaching, tell the truth. And he meant tell the truth about the music. And he would also say, and don't forget who brung you. And my other mentor, I think I can say I got my undergraduate degree from the University of Roger Humphreys. Roger says a similar thing when he says, you didn't come from nowhere, you came from somebody. And that's Nathan and Roger's way of telling us that people before us suffered and did so willingly and knowingly and fought. And I haven't been oppressed. And I'm just putting that out there right now. I'm absolutely keenly aware of my privilege. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that the next generation of musicians understands what others went through, and that if they are musicians who look like me, who come from a background like mine, that they are privileged and they have a responsibility to acknowledge that privilege and use their positions to be real and meaningful allies. And for students of color in this music, we have I have a responsibility as a straight cisgender white man in America to recognize again that I am a guest in this house, and that I have to respect the traditions and the rules of this music. And I say that to students every chance I get. This music is the closest thing I think I have to a religion in some ways. And I want for my students to see that passion, but understand that there's responsibility that comes with that.
All right, Sam and James, thanks so much. Carm, I'm going to give it to you for the last question.
Okay. James, thanks so much. And you're right about the religion. It's all encompassing. And I've seen, again, what you do with your students and how you empower them when you're in the classroom. It's all about empowerment for all of us. I'm going to throw this to Michelle De La Reza. Back to you, Michelle. What changes do you want to see in our community as an artist, and what messages do you want to send to those in the community through art as a voice for social justice? It's kind of wrapping it all in one.
Well, thanks, Carmel. I was thinking also, because we are all RAC teaching artists here, the kind of the universe of kids and students and young people is certainly on the forefront of my mind as the lens through which to view this discussion. And I have to say, last night, like literally at like 6 o'clock yesterday, something happened that I wanted to share as one of the messages that I would want to send out. And that was something that's very personal to me. It's a little bit personal, but I'm right now I've been volunteering and very focused on voter registration and getting out the vote, especially in areas that had very low voter turnout. I've been working with BPEP, to register Pennsylvanians. And I was doing some phone banking and some text messages in preparation for the phone banking. And I had a technological issue, which of course, what do? You go to your kid. So I have a job like, help, Xander, what do I do? So I asked my 12-year-old to help do the texting that I was messing up. And he kind of looked at what the texts were. They were obviously related to voting. And he just stopped. And he said, thanks, Mom, for doing this. That was the end of that conversation. And yeah, he noticed. And it made an imprint on him. And it made an imprint on me. And something that is so important to me, that you have this, moment when you're 18, that your voice is represented through a vote, something you're gifted or given, at 18. Why haven't I been talking to him more about that, to the young people? How can we reinforce civic engagement at all ages? And I started to imagine a group of middle school students. And what if I said to them, we need to increase voter registration and participation. How should we do it? Give them guidance, give them resources. I bet they would come up with some pretty amazing things. And it would also prepare them for that time when they can then cast their first vote. So one, I guess, message is, and we all know this as educators, but to be reminded that we're never too young. And also there's needs to constantly be a check for transparency. So that was one thing. I thought about to send a message to the school leaders in our Zoom community right now and elsewhere, that as a community of teaching artists here, as part of this discussion, that our role is, and our responsibility is now greater than ever, that we need to continue, even in these very difficult times, to be a priority, that we've heard again and again and say, this is not a time to be silent. This is a time, silence is harmful, but consider that the arts provide different ways in which to speak. Consider that students don't all speak, speaking is not their most comfortable medium. Maybe their voice is with a paintbrush, with an instrument, with their bodies, with their words, written words. And that as teaching artists, one of the incredibly valuable things that we have is an ability to support students to find those voices so that they can be heard. I would just continue to urge schools to prioritize the arts in their school environments, and empower students to provide strategies to give the students' own narrative, their own lived experience, their own ideas and stories a place in this world. I'll say one more thing, I guess. I can't see Tammy, I don't know if I have time. I have like a whole list of things. This is kind of goes along with that I think one thing that I've learned, it's also because of our COVID experience, is to really rethink our pacing and to kind of rethink our educational priorities on content and assessment, to create time, to prioritize, I should say, time on processing skills, on, Sam talked about empathy, on expressing feelings. If we have a goal of this conversation to have art for social change, there needs to be time and space to focus on awareness, imagination, visualization, the challenges, the failures, the missteps along the way to ultimately, that ultimately are all important in an art exploration. And I guess my final one would be, and this is talking also to myself, to stay authentic to our own voices, our own art, our own lived experience and stories. And I know that I need to push my assumptions, my implicit biases, and to challenge those. I also know I cannot adopt stories of others, but what I can do is provide a platform for amplifying marginalized stories, both related, kind of within our own organizations, our own communities, and then outside of those as well. So those are a few things, Carm.
Thanks, Rebecca. And in terms of what you're doing, and in terms of people who are watching this who in West Virginia may not know what BPEP is, it's the Black Political Empowerment Project. I too am a member of BPEP, have been for 100 years because I'm older than you. But I've been text messaging and doing the same thing. So it's really needed so we can get voters out and give them an opportunity to raise their consciousness and become aware. Rebecca, I'm going to throw that same question to you to wrap it up, and then we're going to go to Danielle for some Q&A. What changes do you want to see in our communities, and what messages do you want to send in terms of social justice? And I know you have a lot to say. We do need a little bit of time. We're at 2:44, but we need some time for Danielle, and we may have a few comments from others, Jim DeNova, and so Rebecca, I'm gonna give you the floor.
Michelle, thanks everyone who's spoken and everyone who is here. So in terms of what change I want to see, I think we need to move beyond simple fixes and short-term fixes. We can do that by reevaluating our values together, having deep conversations about that, and create structures that reflect those values. I want to see in photography a mirror of our society in that structure and in other structures. I can share an example. Last year, fewer than 1 in 7 front page photos were taken by women. So fewer than 1 in 7 were taken by women. But they're basically the same, equal amounts, men and women in photography. So we've kind of evened the playing field in terms of who's taking pictures, but we need to put pressure on the powers that be, the people who are making the decisions and who is leading, because that's a barrier. So I'd like to see that change. Again, photography has been a field where you move up through relationship. So the question arises in my mind, how can relationships between urban centers and rural areas be strengthened? And how can rural voices be elevated? How can marginalized voices be elevated? And I think Michelle gave one indication, and that is by using our platforms, becoming aware of where we are, and sometimes being quiet and passing it on. Just a short story, I got a call to do a story for the New York Times the other day in Pittsburgh about one of the first football players to die of COVID. I'm not sure if that story has changed, but these months have made me reflect and say, am I the person to do this story? And I declined the assignment. So another story, something else I would like to see change is a history that is really reflective, a truer history. And what we're looking at now is an erasure of Black voices in history and Indigenous history. I see that where I live. There is a photographer and an art maker at West Virginia University. His name is Raymond Thompson Jr. And he has been addressing this issue through a project called Appalachian Ghosts. And this deals with a mining disaster in West Virginia that killed 800 workers, and 2/3 of them were Black. And there has been an effort to silence that story. So it is an example of how art can bring awareness and education. Again, it's addressing this erasure of our histories. I'll conclude by sharing about another artist in West Virginia, Elaine McMillian Sheldon, who many people know. She has really taken it upon herself to address the opioid crisis in West Virginia. And I learned from her through a recent project we participated in about a professor at West Virginia University. He's from Iceland. And Iceland has basically eradicated smoking, alcohol, and drug use among teens.
Yeah.
How have they done that? I'm going to go full circle. They have done that through structures, not simple fixes. They took it on as a nation. And what they did is they took free time and they gave teenagers experiences. They designed programs where they could have activities led and I don't even want to say led, but adults are part of that picture. But I also agree with these models of education that are more democratic rather than hierarchical. And so, yeah, I think that's how we begin to right some of the wrongs. And we challenge our state and we push our legislators to invest in structures that are not quick fixes, but serve the people at all levels. So thanks for letting me have a chance to share.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you for some of those enlightening comments. I was trying to write some of those things down because I want to get back to you and ask you particularly about that incident. We can talk later. I'm going to turn it back over to Jim Wolf so Jim can kind of wrap it up. And I think Jim DeNova wants to make a few comments. So Jim, Wolf and DeNova.
My only job right now is to turn it over to Jim DeNova. We're going to ask Jim to reflect a little bit on what has been said and talk about it from the philanthropy and the foundation perspective. So Dr. DeNova, go for it.
I will be brief. So first of all, I want to thank you all. I thought this was a powerful afternoon of really rich comments. And I envision using the recording in a variety of ways. As a whole, in parts, this is a valuable educational tool today. So thank you for that. It will be the gift that keeps on giving. And please come back in May. So one comment that just streams through all of this for me, because there was great variation on experiences you had and the experiences you're creating for kids. And for me, in my simple-minded way of looking at life is kids create naturally, kids care. Kids have things to say, and you all are given the means to act on those messages. And that just seems to permeate this whole conversation, which I loved. So I want to get in the remaining moments to some comments from the audience, because I know some of the names down there and I know some very opinionated people out there. So you've never been shy before, don't be shy now. So it doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment. But I would like to pose a question to the audience about philanthropy. And this has always been a mystery to me. Foundations have influence. And people who work at foundations are given voice. And my colleagues and I don't know why. We don't control great wealth. Philanthropy has a certain mystique, but it gives us sort of a podium, a lectern to opine. So what do you all think we should be doing? What should we, philanthropy, be doing that we're not doing? What should we be saying that we're not saying? And how do we use the sort of the rostrum that we're given, whether we merit it or not, to do something a little more boldly than we're doing now? I'd like to know. So let me just add that to the mix of questions and comments for the artists and the creators. Any other, questions or comments for the funder?
A couple people ask about the issue of transportation for low-income families and families that are kind of spread out. Acknowledging that there's a lot of great arts institutions, but sometimes transportation is a barrier. So I will put that out there. If anyone would like to maybe address whether or not that has been something that's been discussed as an area that perhaps foundations would be interested in supporting, or I think RAC does this wonderfully. That's really at the heart of this program, which is, to get these programs out into schools, because we're able to reach out into these communities that are often, far away from some of the cultural institutions. But that was one question that did come
Danielle, I'm going to call on Michelle Sable, and I'm just going to answer and really speak to what Jim said. One of the things that the Benedum Foundation does is give us the latitude of incorporating things when we're writing a proposal and submitting a proposal, to incorporate things like transportation and travel, because schools don't always have those resources, particularly in southwestern Pennsylvania and West Virginia and eastern Ohio. So that's one of the things that philanthropists, I think, can be more mindful of, that they need to not just have a prescriptive grid that fits this, this, and this, and to broaden that a bit, because a school that might have a large population may not have money for bus transportation. Michelle, I'm going to segue to you in the interest of time, because I know you've done this. You've taken several field trips under the RAC grant.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about the opportunities that allowed us, because even if you partner with the schools and the schools do the transportation or however it goes, one thing I was kind of sad about is when I took them to the Pittsburgh Glass Center and everybody got to do workshops, like all the kids got to work in glass that day, with hot glass with the furnaces, and it was just incredible. But they did offer that our students could have scholarships there, and all they needed to do was just fill out a very small little portfolio thing. It was nothing. Like, they would have taken some of those kids, and those kids were really interested they were really interested, but there was no connection between like what I had done and like the teacher in the classroom was not proactive in helping them, even though I asked them. I just wish that I could have then said, hey, get your parents to sign this slip, and then we have transportation to get you there for these weekends where they're giving you scholarships. Because like, it's good to teach these kids things, but that's what I mean about systems. Like, how do I get these kids a resume to the point where they feel like they want to go to college and they want to study something, and then they're building on something? I don't want it to just dissipate. And I saw that as just one instance where I didn't have a transportation or, like mechanism to go further, even though there was opportunity.
And again, that's something that I think can be built into any program. I know Danielle's Ogilvy Institute program allows for transportation. Those are problems. It's a problem that some students don't have iPads to connect, or some, as Rebecca said, didn't have cameras, so use cell phones. So those are things I think that philanthropists can take into account. And that's a good example of Michelle. And the teacher has to be connected. Sam probably can say that more heartily than anyone. If you don't have a connected teacher when you're going through that, or a series of teachers and a co-curricular interest in the project, it's got to come from the top down. Danielle, I think there's a couple of other questions. I think we have, Tammy is telling us, it's 2:59. We can continue maybe for 5 more minutes if you want to continue with one question, or if everyone's interested.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
I was going to make a very brief comment about what can philanthropy do, transportation, and it sounds like money for buses. So the earlier comment about rural-urban divide is a huge inequity. I mean, geography is a huge contributor to the inequitable access to resources. So the question is, who all cares in a particular community? So it's not always the foundation or one proposal. Sometimes it's a matter of organizing those in a community who care about getting these kids connected. And when you mentioned the Glass Center, I of course remember the mobile glass furnace going to Wheeling and parking at Ogilvy so that there could be glass blowing there. That's one creative option. The other is, I look at foundations can pay for some things, but we're one of a number of contributors to something. Local chambers and businesses who pay much more for advertising than they would for transportation can pay for advertising on buses at a fraction of the cost. So you will see in a lot of cases, the Comcast bus, the whatever bus, the Toyota van to arts, don't leave other sectors out. Everybody get together. And one of the early surprises around RAC is when we had one of our early public art presentations, banks, other corporate commercial real estate agents, people raise their hands. I want one next year on my site. I want one next year on my site. They're willing to pay. I mean, but you got to organize them and say, we all in this together. And you'd be surprised. It's like stone soup. All of a sudden, everybody contributes something and you have soup. That's for the old people in the room. That's all.
There was another question from someone asking if there's a directory or catalog of artists of color and or programs that are doing the work of using the arts as a vehicle for social justice and equity.
Jim Wolf and I have had this conversation about a bank and a catalog of artists and artists of color and artists not of color. I know one of the resources that we do use for Ogilvy Institute is Tamarack Foundation. They have a bank of artists and they do a newsletter, and they do a wonderful newsletter. I've been forwarding it to Michelle De La Reza for their upcoming cohorts in West Virginia. But Tamarack really kind of offers a bank of artists per se. Jim Wolf, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the answer to the question, as far as I know, is that no, there isn't something like that exists. It would be a wonderful thing to have. My guess is that right now, the best thing that either the State Arts Office or other organizations could do would be to help direct someone to either individuals or organizations that are doing this kind of work in a particular community. But I'm not aware of any work that is happening right now to establish that kind of a directory. But particularly there's some ideas going around about making some progress towards establishing a directory in general. But the question is more of a specific question about artists of color or programs doing social justice and equity work. And I'm not aware of anything. I think the best thing we could do would be to try to help network and direct people towards one another.
For anyone interested in how that's playing out in photography, the organizations that I can mention are Diversify Photo, the Authority Collective, and Women Photograph.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Great.
I think a few people in the chat have said that they've got to leave, and it is 3 p.m. And in the interest of time, I think we are going to have to close it out. But once again, Danielle, as Danielle reminded you, this is the first of a two-part dialogue. And we hope that you will attend the RAC Institute. Danielle, if you just want to give them the details one more time about the RAC Spring Institute, and then I have a few closing comments to make. And I want to thank everybody before you start logging off, before I make my closing comments, if you have to leave and not hear them. But thank you all so much for dynamic and amazing conversation, full of so much energy and commitment and enthusiasm. Danielle, do you want to just give them the details of the RAC?
Commercial. Yeah. The commercial. I hope you will join us, hopefully in person, on May the 12th for the Spring RAC Institute. Institute will be hosting it and holding it at Wheeling Country Day School in Wheeling. So we hope to see you in person there. I look forward to continuing this conversation. I think it was really a powerful, inspiring conversation. And I love all the words that kept coming up today: resilience, empathy, problem solving, understanding, asking questions, communication, you know, and just think, you know, in order to make positive change, you know, we do all of these types of things. We work with our kids and we instill that in them. And I think the arts is a really powerful way to do that. So I look forward to collaborating with all of you. And again, I hope to see you all on May the 12th and look forward to continuing to chat.
Thanks, Danielle. And thank you, Jim Wolf. Thank you, everyone on this conversation today. Thank you for all the questions from our audience, and I hope to talk to everyone. I did put my email address in I think I put it in the everyone box, so you can certainly connect with me. I just want to say one more thing, and I was privy to attend the Mid-Atlantic Arts Conference this year, the 2020. Jim Wolf and Danielle. Jim Wolf was responsible for one of the parties, I think, pulling it together. And Danielle, I know, attended several sessions, and I think Attack Theater did. And probably everyone in this screen had a chance to hear some of those sessions. But during the plenary session, there was an amazing young man named Michael O'Brien, and it's O''B''RYAN, who was the plenary speaker. And I'm going to close with his quote because I think it really sums up everything that we've talked about today. He said, "All kids are born with voice. We either suppress or enhance that voice. Teaching artists can magnify and amplify that voice through the arts. Arts can help define inclusion, equity, and justice for students through project-based learning and developmentally appropriate play." I think that's what we've talked about today, and I think that sums it up very well. Thank you all for being here. Look forward to continuing the conversation in May. May you have a lovely weekend.